UC Merced hosted a State of the Science for the Tulare Basin, and scientists from all throughout the UC system and Cooperative Extension and other scientists gathered at Merced, and we went through some sessions of, what is the state of the knowledge, what science do we have, where the gaps are, and very informative. And I'm thinking that part of what we'll learn today is based on some of that. Top people working on these issues from around the UC system, providing some input as to what we know and what we don't, and what gaps need to be filled. So with that, you can see here's the talk this afternoon from Tom Harmon is multi-benefit and land repurposing, and talking about those gaps and how we transition. So are we ready to go then?
I'm ready. You're ready.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I can't be there with you. A little too much going on campus this week, and so I found myself double booked, and I really thank some people for quickly pivoting to this Zoom presentation. I'd rather be there and see you folks and talk to you first. So I'm going to try to bring you up to date on some of the work that we've done on the MLRP, multi-benefit land repurposing, and along the way talk about some of the gaps that we need to fill, and if we want to hope to settle on a process that I think most people want it to be rational, transparent, so they can understand what's going on, and nobody's pulling the wool over anyone else's eyes, and hopefully transferable, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel should we need to continue this into the future, which we probably will. So how are we doing with this MLRP beast? It's a very complex problem, very interesting problem. I've been working on it. I'm a environmental engineering background, kind of a civil engineer, overseeing some work on technical work on the Tule and the Kauai groundwater subbasins with my colleague Josue Medellin Azuara, who's a hydrologist and water resources engineer. We've got a great team up at Merced, and learned a lot about your region, and worked with a lot of great people, a lot of dedicated people, putting together what is coming along as a toolkit. I'll give you an example of how that works for documenting the MLRP process and its impacts. As we, it's a pretty complicated toolkit already, I'll admit. Perhaps a little too complicated, but the more you think about it in this kind of challenging socio-environmental problem, some would call this a wicked problem with many solutions that not everyone can agree on. There's always something else, or always something missing, or always some part that could be improved upon. So it's sort of an endless problem. So we'll talk about that as well. And then hopefully it can leave you with some parting thoughts along the lines of, should we be thinking bigger? We tend to think about difficult changes like this in the ways of how to preserve as much of the status quo as possible. How can we not disturb the economy too much, or minimize disturbances at least? But is there a bigger, longer-term way of thinking that could really help form the way we think about it now? So most of you, I'm not sure who's in the room there, but I'm sure a lot of you are pretty well versed in multi-benefit land repurposing. So I made a conscious decision not to drag you through too much of a review on that. Anyone, feel free to contact me if you would like a little primer on the side some other time. But the MLRP is there to address our groundwater overdraft problems in the state, repurposing irrigated agricultural land to reduce water reuse, enhance groundwater recharge where it makes sense to try to pay back that overdraft that we've accumulated over the years. And while doing this, to make a really conscious effort to create other benefits for the communities and ecosystems of these groundwater sub-basins. So clearly a multifaceted problem, not an easy problem to solve and to optimize. And so it's been a major question of how do we execute this as fairly and transparently as possible. And the Department of Conservation is administering this project has allowed the different sub-basins to try different things, and I think that's a good strategy because you can go from the top down and just pick the land, let the people who know the watershed choose the land. You can go from the bottom up where volunteers from the watershed pop up and for whatever reason are interested in having their land repurposed, or somewhere in the middle. It's not clear exactly where the best answer is. Certainly faster to go top down, certainly slower usually to go from bottom up and try to gain consensus on things, but better remains to be seen. So how might a community, the basin community, if we think of ourselves as a basin community, think about this? So one way we're thinking about it, just to take a quick dive into our specific project, is to look and make the mapping and make the different characteristics of the landscape easily accessible to the whole spectrum of decision makers and stakeholders, so that no one is left out. No one needs an ArcGIS license and a master's degree in geospatial analysis to follow the discussion. We wanted to make an interactive mapping application that would identify suitable lands for repurpose, evaluate the land in terms of cost and benefit for repurposing, and minimize the various impacts, such as economic impacts to the region. So we're currently about, I'd say, at a halfway point with this toolkit development. We've done the suitability aspect of it, and we're well along the way of building the cost-benefit calculators and just getting started on the heavy lifting of the economic analysis. So what we envision with the end product is a screening tool for land selection for potential repurposing, assessing the different land uses that might be possible in the repurposing portfolio. It's a coarse resolution model, 1 mile spatial resolution. So that's why we call it a screening tool. You would need to take a deeper dive onto the specific property to take a look at what's proposed there. And that makes sense. You wouldn't want to just build a aquifer recharge basin on your farm without digging a few holes and taking a few samples and trying to do some infiltration tests. So you've always got to look at the site-specific issues. We want it user-friendly and web-based, mainly to just increase the accessibility to all the players here. So we took a participatory approach. Fortunately, these MLRP projects had a lot of great partners in the various sectors, in the irrigation districts, the natural resources management districts, the NGOs for conservation and restoration of land, and the grassroots community members, coordinated through groups like Self-Help Enterprise. So I felt like we had great access to a lot of great people with a lot of great ideas. And through an iterative process, we're able to build a tool that kind of accepts input from different people on which data we should have underlying this tool that we're creating. So jumping into this real quick, the tool allows you to look at land use through 6 different lenses or criteria for repurposing suitability. The first lens is, and probably the most obvious lens given the region, is the agricultural socioeconomic factors. So what kind of crops are on the land? What kind of revenue do they throw off? What kind of jobs do the land support? And what kind of water is applied to support that land? And that's kind of what I have here in the second slide. Next, we have suitability of the land for recharge. And this is our most complicated layer, I'll say. We look at things like the SAGB index, which tells you how good the upper layers of soil are for water infiltration. And then we look deeper at the DWR's aerial electromagnetic data, AEM, and the U.S. Geological Survey's Central Valley hydrologic model to try to get a good idea of the connectivity between the surface soil and the aquifer where we really want that water to get. Then we also look at some overdraft indicators. What's the density of dry well occurrences? What's the severity of subsidence in the area? And finally, what's the proximity to conveyance systems, which helps a lot to get that flood water there, of course, if you're going to do aquifer recharge during the winter months. Thirdly, we have the environmental health risk mitigation layer, which is focused around small rural communities in the region and looks for incidences of high pesticide application and low nitrogen applications. So in this case, if you had high pesticide applications, that would go away if the land was repurposed. That would make it more suitable. If you had low nitrogen applications on the land and you were going to repurpose, say, to groundwater recharge, that would be more suitable because you would have less of a risk of adding pollution to the community's groundwater supply. This is a tough problem, though, that the data aren't as good for this layer, and we fully support long-term monitoring with respect to any kind of recharge around communities that are dependent on groundwater supplies. Habitat restoration and conservation was kind of our most interesting layer for the two subbasins that we worked in. Again, those were Tule and Kauai. And these partners had different preferences in the area of habitat restoration and conservation, and different products they preferred to push different issues forward in this area. So this really illustrates the importance of kind of making a little bit of a site-specific characteristic of this tool by tweaking different layers to the preferences of the users. So in Tule, the land that's more suitable was using upland habitat and riparian areas, and for Kauai, areas were marked with higher suitable with high biodiversity, significant habitat, and I think I forgot to type it here, but also to connect wildlife corridors, which is basically ended up being a lot of riparian areas as well. Renewable energy production, it's one of our simpler layers, has to do with how suitable the area is for solar. It's mostly very suitable, as you guessed, but is it also close to a substation, and also is it an exclusion area where there's legal or administrative restrictions on whether a solar farm could be placed there. And lastly, flood risk mitigation. This one came up because while we were doing a lot of the planning and discussion, we had the big floods of winter 2023. And so we threw this layer into the mix. And in this case, we're looking at areas upstream of communities and around floodplains. And we make use of the FEMA flood maps to try to pick areas that you would get sort of the most bang for your buck in terms of flood mitigation risk by prioritizing them for repurposing, either as just water retention areas or preferably as recharge areas during flood periods. Here's an example of what these layers look like with both of the basins side by side, sub-basins side by side, Kauai on top and Tule on bottom there. And these are the lenses that are looked through. We're continuing to work on the cost-benefit estimates. The nice thing about the model is that you can choose which of the 6 lenses you're interested in. You can take combinations of them, 2 or 3 or 4 of them, and you can assign different weights to those areas, and it will mash up a new map that gives you the combined suitability for the different multi-benefits that you're choosing. So just to give you some flavor of it, here's a little movie that shows how the interface looks. On the left-hand side, you look at all the data sources from which the toolkit is built. And on the right-hand side now, you can choose which areas you wish to prioritize. For example, 100% agriculture, or 50% agriculture, 50% recharge, or you could throw flood mitigation in and do 1/3 each. And each time the new color map will appear and give those layers a different score. So from most of what I've seen and most of what we talked about at the Merced event was a little bit more of a short-term perspective, and short-term, long-term is a subjective time frame, and I guess the older you get, the more 6 or 7 years from now seems like short-term. Sure does to me. How can we execute MLRP at a sufficient scale to regain the water security for these regions, for these overdrafted regions, without a major disruption to the regional economy? That's a pretty noble question to ask and a pretty hard problem to solve, but it's fairly short term. So if we were going to do that, for example, we might say, let's choose agriculture and recharge as our big 2 levers by which to get ourselves back on a sustainable track. So we would choose our priorities. In this case, in scenario 1, we choose agriculture and recharge. In scenario 2, we might choose habitat, communities for environmental health, and agriculture. These would be 2 ways of looking at the same problem. You would rank your choices in order of importance. I believe in this one for agriculture and recharge, we said let's rank them equally, so 50% priority on agriculture and 50% on the recharge potential. And then we'd look at the resulting map. And then we would, before making final decisions on sites, we would check specific land parcels more carefully. So the first thing you should notice is the outcomes are very different for different priorities. And if you've been playing along in the MLRP process, different groups have different agendas, different needs, different areas that they support. And so you're right. I think I heard somebody say it, in fact, today, that you do not want the same things. And so why would your maps look the same? And they wouldn't. But at least this gives you a starting point where perhaps you can find some pixels that are the same, or the pixels get you both towards the answers that you want. So the way to read this map is that the red is very low suitability for repurposing. In this case, on the left-hand side, it would mean that perhaps you have a very high value crop that doesn't require as much water as other crops. It doesn't have a lot of jobs associated with it, and that is also not very good for recharge. That would be primo land to avoid the repurposing on it, and it would get a red on it. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, the dark green, perhaps it's a low value crop that doesn't support many jobs and is pretty good for recharge. In that case, the scoreboard is telling you that's a pretty good place to start thinking about it. Take a closer look. So we haven't gotten very far into the economic analysis right now, so this is a very crude look, just looking at crop revenue and starting to get some order of magnitude ideas of what kind of changes we're looking at here. And so at the top is the Thule subbasin, which I think it's a 20-year average is about 117,000 acre feet per year overdraft on the aquifer credit card balance there. You could select land in different ways, because right now you just have a map. The map doesn't tell you which land to take, but those pixels all have a score associated with them. And you could go by the purple method, which says, I'm just going to take the highest ranked land and I'm going to repurpose it. And this would be a very top-down approach, of course. And if you did that, you would get these purple results that say about 11,000 hectares. Sorry for the change in units, but we're writing this up and getting it into a journal article, and they like the SI units. So the purple says about 11,000 hectares, a loss of revenue of about $100 million. This is just by taking those crops off the table. It says nothing about what will be done with the land or what kind of response other parts of the economy will have. So that's why I say this is crude. And then 655 jobs lost with that land going out. And again, this is just taking that land out of production, so it doesn't say anything about workers finding work other places, as I'm sure some of them would. Another way to look at it would be to take the pixels that use the most water, and that would be this aqua color in the middle. In this case, you would get away with a little bit less land. You really don't pick up too much land in this case. And then you would lose a little more from the revenue, because some of those crops would have maybe higher value than the ranked ones on the purple case. And the jobs would be a little bit higher too, but really I have to admit, at the resolution of this toolkit, that's about the same number there. And finally, the yellow case would be just focusing on crops that have the lowest revenues. And so, of course, if you focus completely on the lowest revenues, you would lose the least money there, and by taking $81 million off the table. So this is just a rough idea of where we're going, but we want to connect the map to a more robust economic model that actually ties into the regional economy and doesn't just talk about the loss of crop revenue, which is a very crude measuring stick. So I think you probably gathered, I know I worry about this a little bit, as the toolkit has gotten to be quite complicated, where we want it to be accessible. Yet it's still quite simple when you look at scenario one. Scenario one is basically telling you what we know, right? Reduce water use, preserve jobs, and recharge where you can to pay off the overdraft more quickly. That's a pretty basic formula, and it makes some sense. Of course, as you make other things prioritized, like renewable energy or habitat, these prescriptions are going to change. So a lot of challenges remain, and a lot of these came up in the great discussion that we had up at Merced a couple of weeks ago. The toolkit, for one, we need to turn the toolkit around so it will tell us the best scenarios. That's going to be huge computational lift, but we're thinking of some machine learning and AI techniques for the toolkit to find the best pattern of pixels to solve the problem. There's a lot of hydrological issues that could be made better. It's just so complex, and you try to find the right level of complexity so you can get the darn thing up and running and tested. But there's things like the climate change impacts, which are helping to force this issue on us, of course. Better understanding of atmospheric rivers and where they hit and where the water comes off the mountain front. The connection with that uphill part of the basin is not really in this model or this toolkit too well right now. Effective recharge strategies, interbasin transfer issues. It was, staring you right in the face, of course, that these two basins are connected together, as you know. So what about recharge across the boundaries? What about trading water across the boundaries? And then, as I mentioned, the recharge pollution connection. As we get better and more proficient at recharge, we're going to tap legacy pollution sources underground. So it's best to acknowledge that and be ready and be watching for that and be ready to respond to it. Environmental health was very simple, as I said. We need to think about how to integrate monitoring into the MLRP effectively. These are pilot studies that are being funded right now. What about long-term research on these, or long-term monitoring? Groundwater doesn't do things quickly. So just to be able to monitor during the course of your pilot grant is not going to be sufficient. You need to watch things for 10, 15, 20 years. Sociocultural benefits. We need to understand these better and learn to efficiently incorporate input from all community members. There are many ways to rearrange the landscape, so to speak. Some people may prefer habitat restoration. Other people may have very deep cultural needs for land that should be repurposed back to other uses that are less impactful on the landscape. Other people may prefer recreational opportunities, baseball fields or soccer fields and other things. Cost and benefits is no easy trick, as we're in the middle of that right now. As most of us know, some things are quite easily monetizable and others are not. Not so monetizable. We have to either take deep dives into how to monetize them, or preferably maybe come up with scales and just live with the fact that one column is going to have money in it and another column is going to have a ranking in terms of benefits. Governance, I think we're running a great experiment right now with the different MLRP projects and the different critically overdrafted subbasins. We don't know what best practice is, but we have the statewide support entity and the DOC folks involved with that, and Environmental Defense Fund, all trying to take notes on this and hopefully capture best practices so that next time around we have good ideas of how to start it. Most of us realize that there's institutional challenges as well. A lot of the sort of mission-specific agencies actually may have policy barriers to some of the MLRP repurposing activities, such as flooding farmland to get recharge, for example, or other barriers and rules and regulations that are hiccups in the process. So these need to start building interagency synergies, working groups to kind of come up with workarounds or solutions or flat out changes in policy to make sure that we watch things carefully. We don't want unintended consequences, but we also need to start thinking together about things like how are we going to floodplains and these sorts of things. Economic impacts, as I mentioned, pretty crude right now. The evaluations we've done, there's a lot. How would you execute MLRP if your goal is to transform the basin as a place to work and live. So how would you really like to picture it for future generations here? So this leads to some very big questions. You know, what will agriculture in Tulare Basin look like in 50 years? What will farm work look like? Probably less strenuous and less dangerous, I would hope. Perhaps a bit more mechanized and automated, perhaps with jobs springing from the infusion of technology into the sector. What will the economy look like? Is it possible that we haven't chosen enough exciting land repurposing options and put them on the menu? Just spitballing here, but what if some of the land was made super available, super cheap to industries to come in and build centers of activity in biotechnology and maybe the foundations of a bioeconomy that needs to come about as we move into sort of the next era of our state. And then if that were all to happen, we think about what would it be like to live in the Tulare Basin that was starting to become fully electrified. We were starting to win our battle against environmental degradation of the air and the water. And all of a sudden, we may have a different outlook on whether on how the MLRP process should play out, what the challenges that we thought were so insurmountable were actually great opportunities to change the region and realize the potential that we have. So that's what I have today, and thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to take a few questions. I can't hear anyone.
Can you hear me, Tom?
Now I can.
Okay, thank you. This is Gregory with River Partners. Nice to see you virtually. Speaking to your question about the future and looking really long term, 2055 is a year that I haven't looked at much except for being very close to retirement, hopefully. One of the great things about the MLRP has been the amount of emphasis on community engagement and participatory development of the program in each subbasin, allowing stakeholder advisory committees to come together, et cetera. But when I think about implementation, we've seen how here in the first wave of the program, everything is going very slowly because we're building it, and we're building it upon this developing understanding that we have based on this community input. It's important that the program or whatever programs come out of this process continue to evolve as the economy and the social fabric of California change. But one of the conundrums that comes into my mind is that we will forever be burdened by this kind of slow amount of progress if we continue to allow so much participation without some kind of mechanization. Like we need to create a framework that is going to serve as a foundation for future implementation. And I think that one of the failings of the program in this stage is that we don't have funding for long-term monitoring of projects. And if we can't monitor these projects today, at what point in time are we going to go and say, okay, we have to monitor these if we're going to have good projects in the future? And to miss that here at the beginning, I feel like is going to be detrimental to future implementation and getting things right in the long run. And what information are people in 2040 or 2050 going to be using to look back upon to inform their decisions about projects in the future?
Yeah, that's spot on, Gregory, and I think we have to give some careful thought to what a monitoring plan looks like. We can't we can't go overboard. We have to make it sustainable. I mean, the reason we're here is groundwater, so it should involve a good dose of groundwater monitoring. We've talked a lot about enabling the community to monitor their own groundwater, so that they're not susceptible to the ups and downs of the state government, where the monitoring comes hot and heavy for 3 years and then goes away for 5 years. But being able to manage it on their own, at least not for everything, but for at least for some indicators. And I think definitely that, and then definitely the air quality, perhaps through the schools and the hospitals, and again, kind of a community engaged effort to keep these small, inexpensive, and internet connected devices that are distributed through the area. And then for the ecosystems, I think there's real opportunity there through imagery and game cameras and websites to keep the community's imagination engaged and keep them excited about these things that are in their backyard, so they just don't fade away and go to seed, so to speak. But I really do think it would behoove us to come up with a solid plan that was doable, not try to monitoring everything everywhere, but do it smart and do it in a sustainable way, as opposed to over instrumenting it.
So, yeah, I want to ask sort of a conceptual question. The analysis strikes me as a homocentric analysis. It's an analysis done from strictly the perception of human beings. And was any consideration given to a geocentric analysis, an analysis from the point of view of the Earth and what the Earth needs, that would then almost guarantee that a solution would give us what we need in the long run?
So that's an interesting way to put it. I like that. We have the levers in there, for example, if we were to say groundwater recharge and habitat restoration are the only things we care about, I would kind of move it in the Earth-centric direction, and we could get answers that we would get answers that way. And I think that where this toolkit is going is that it's such a heavy lift computationally that we're going to need the community to give us scenarios that they want to see. So some of them are obvious. Don't lose too much of our money and bring back our groundwater within 20 years or so. But others, we need to hear about the kind that you just articulated. How do we build that in? When you start to run a lot of the scenarios, some of the results are pretty obvious. Bringing back rivers ticks a lot of boxes. You get the flood mitigation, you get the habitat, you get the recharge. And so folks who work on that sort of thing, I think that's the right space. And you didn't need our fancy checkerboard to tell you that, but it is kind of reassuring to see that the nature-based solutions do kind of fall out when you start to add, as long as you add the habitat and the recharge to the list of priorities. If you exclude them, then it just stays on the land surface and it's all about the ag and the water. Does that kind of address your comments? Sorry if I...
So this is John Shelton. beginning of the week, we had a meeting of the San Joaquin Valley Water CAP and had some pretty good discussions about the economics. We also talked about the multi-benefit land retirement program and other issues. One of the problems that we ran into towards the end of our second day was just the idea there's a lot of hard truths out there. One, we're still talking about, at best, retiring over 500,000 acres of farmland. Tremendous economic turmoil that will come with that, and if it's not done right, potentially getting into a poverty trap where things just start going belly up. Then you add into that the idea that some of our nut crops like almonds are underwater now, as far as they are making less than it takes to farm them, much less pay off a lot of the loans that a lot of San Joaquin Valley Ag relies on. Land values have gone down in many places. I asked the question earlier for Kings and Tulare. What we heard from the folks at the CAP was that they have numbers down in the Kern where it is for a lot of the white space land area without surface water, 50% value loss. And so those people who took loans on that, the banks are calling it in, so that's the foreclosures that are happening. And with the foreclosures, the banks aren't selling. Some places they're able to distribute, but they're not selling too much because there's not a lot of capital to buy it. So you look at all this, and there's a lot of hard choices that need to be made. Then the other thing we throw in here is under the GSAs, we basically have 10 years. And the multi-benefit land retirement program statewide, I think, has talked about demonstrations on somewhere around 1,000 acres. That did include some areas out of our basin and other areas. 1,000 acres, when you're thinking maybe 500,000 needs to be done in 10 years, is at least one order of magnitude too small, so it has to be thrown together much quicker than that. So with your analysis and everything else, I am actually an optimist that we can get this done, and it's groups like this and others that are going to help us. But with your thoughts on the things you're looking at, what do we need to push buttons on hardest to avoid the worst case scenarios where all of a sudden everything just starts crashing down and there's no economics in the San Joaquin Valley actually to do the things we want to do?
Yeah, thanks for that easy question. The more I think about it, and this is me mainly, but the way the toolkit, going back to what I said a moment ago, the way that the toolkit keeps wanting to point me towards nature-based solutions, also I think points to solutions where everybody can hurt a little bit, and it doesn't all have to be on one or two big property owners. It's been the case, I believe, over in the Pajaro Basin over on the coast, which I understand is a completely different animal, but trying to repurpose land along the old rivers, letting the water flow there, letting the recharge that used to happen there, seems like one way to get started on this thing that might pay reasonably big dividends and maybe get some momentum in the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Tom, and thanks everybody for participating. Okay, so but the next big session we have is again looking at multi-benefit land repurposing in a panel. Going to be facilitated by Robert Gould from Ag Innovation.
A little bit different. We're going to be focusing a little bit more today on this session on kind of what does it really take to enable the change that's required of MLRP and MLR in general. So we're going to be talking about MLRP in terms of the program that's being funded by the DOC, but also just the broader set of strategies that are being implemented by that you could call multi-benefit land repurposing more broadly. And that's happening, it's been happening for a long time. It's going to continue to happen more generally. And it's something that that doesn't only happen through this program that many of us are involved with. So we're going to be trying to answer these questions in terms of like, how do you act and create change when you don't have all the data, don't have all the answers, and you're trying to figure them out as you're trying to enroll landowners, growers, and GSAs and all the other stakeholders in the process. And it is a very collaborative and inclusive process that which we're grateful for. It makes it challenging, but all the richer. Also, just so you know, because of all the great comments and commentary today, I had a whole set of questions, and of course I had to keep many of those questions as we went through the day. So I'm going to be referring to some of my notes as we go through this. Don't worry, panelists, these are questions that are more or less the same ones that we sent you, so don't be too surprised. You shouldn't be too surprised, I should say. The other thing I want to acknowledge, and Steve Hayes does a good job about bringing this up, is that there's upwards of $200 million of funding coming through Prop 4, funding for multi-benefit land repurposing. That's a pretty big number. It doesn't come all at once, but it will be available. And it also allows the work that's happening to continue to build in terms of momentum, and also it really can support the coordination of a lot of different players, many of whom are in this room. So we have a great set of panelists today. Again, some of them are very involved in MLRP, the program, Logan and Reyn specifically, as well as myself through the Thule Subbasin Project, Reyn with Kauai and Logan with 3 MLRP.
Thule, Kauai, and Westlands, yeah.
Yeah. And the other panelists here just bring a wealth of experience from their organizations that they're involved with, that are kind of fit under the broader MLR umbrella. So I just want to I know your names were introduced, but I just want to just give you each a moment to kind of say your name, your role, and the organization you're with, and your interest relative to land repurposing, especially multi-benefit land repurposing.
Is it on?
It sounds like it's on, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm Nancy Wahl-Scheurich, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. That's RCDs, who you've heard talked about today, and I look forward to talking more about them soon.
Logan Robertson Huecker, Executive Director of Sequoia Riverlands Trust. We're the regional land trust for the southern Sierra Nevada and San Joaquin Valley, and we also do a significant portion of our work in the Carrizo Plain, San Luis Obispo County.
Reyn Akiona, Executive Director of Valley Eco. We're a small ecological outfit located in Merced County, and our work is all primarily in the San Joaquin Valley. The nexus with MLRP is we sort of are administering and developing both the Kauai Subbasin program and the Merced Subbasin program.
Hi everybody, my name is Craig Isola. I'm the Conservation Coordinator for the Central Valley Joint Venture. I'm one of 3 staff employees with the Central Valley Joint Venture and work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. What the Central Valley Joint Venture is a collaboration of 20 different member organizations. It's federal agencies, state agencies, NGOs, private industry, that all come together basically to protect the environment or improve the environment for birds, other wildlife, and people. So I guess our nexus would be that we do have habitat objectives for wetland, riparian, and grassland in the Tulare Basin, and we hope to be able to work within all MLRP to be able to get some of that on the ground.
I'm Hurley, and I talk loud. Welcome to the afternoon. Everybody wake up, please. Siesta's over. Carbohydrates are filtering through. I'm the general manager of McMullin Area Groundwater Sustainability Agency at the confluence of the San Joaquin and Kings Rivers in western Fresno County. I'm an expat of water districts, 8 of them, different organizations in the Tulare Lake bottom and the Tulare Lake Basin generally. I also am a former executive director of the Tranquility RCD, now a board member of the Tranquility RCD, and a board member in the Sierra RCD, as well as a member of the board of Nancy's organization, the California Association of RCDs. So if you get a flavor of my interest. Well, and I'm also, I guess, kind of am I a founding guy in Tulare Basin Watershed Partnership Network? I guess I am.
Yeah, sure.
I have a little bit to do with the Tulare Basin Watershed Partnership Network as well. But I'm a multi-layered, not so much multi-benefit, but multi-layered interest in this entire region. And I absolutely am with John. I believe that this region will survive, and it will survive handily and handsomely by the time we are done because of groups just like this. And I'm really, really happy to participate and do what I can to pump you all up.
That's the spirit. I love it. And before we get going, I'm just going to say that we have a series of questions, several questions for the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the group as well. I know we're probably a little compressed for time, so we may not have as much time for a free-ranging conversation, but we'll do our best. And also, before we begin, I just want to one thought I want us to remember is that even though we know that repurposing is needed and that will have benefits. And the future is looking bright ultimately, that it's not without risk and harm potentially to many farmers, many landowners, many families, many communities. So I think we also just need to remember that side of it, that there's people that are not thrilled about this idea at all. And for good reason, and it actually impacts them greatly, or could potentially impact them greatly. So I think it's important to remember that, and know that it's a big deal for many folks, many people, many organizations. And we also know that there are benefits and upsides to this work as well, ultimately, if we do it well. We're going to go right, we're jumping right in. Okay.
Just going to provide a point of clarity to set the conversation, Robert.
Yep.
So multi-benefit land repurposing through the state or through the Department of Conservation, and I suspect we'll decide today that it's not just the Department of Conservation that does this. That's not the same thing as Sigma. So I'm just going to caveat that now, right? So like the baseline of land or water allocations and water scarcities, like those are not driven by land repurposing. And so just a point of clarity as we continue the conversation, it's important that we tease those things apart, right? Like we evaluate the knoll landscape effectively as what it will be under Sigma without MLRP.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and thanks for making that distinction. I assume that most people know that, but it's good to make that really clear. And that, again, MLRP as a program is completely voluntary, and it really is sort of the leading edge of like, how do you start kind of innovating? How do you start creating solutions that can get out in front of Sigma and provide some answers before you have to kind of really get into the tough decisions here. So I think we're just going to begin with our very first question. And it really is, kind of what I was going to get to is, what are some of the solutions that you've seen thus far in MLRP that are being proposed, that are being funded, and which are the ones that have sort of like some real potential to take off or be replicated? Now, some of them are maybe a little bit niche and unique, but some of them also potentially have some potential to really go farther than that. I think I'll probably start with those that are in the MLRP program specifically, like Reyn and Logan, but others can chime in more broadly too. Yeah, just what you're seeing in terms of projects that are being supported and funded so far.
Yeah, it's interesting. It still feels really early in terms of projects. I think someone else might be able to correct me. I think there's been a total of 6 or 8 projects approved by the Department of Conservation for the multi-benefit land repurposing statewide. 5 of those, I believe, were in the Kauai, and there's a couple initially in some other places. Others are in the pipeline. There's a lot in the pipeline. But as far as like projects being able to be viewed as like scalable or replicable solutions, I don't know if we're there yet in the project sphere. In the collaboration sphere and in sort of the human systems that we're setting up to support this work, I think there is potential for, I know replicability is already happening, and scalability and learning as well. There's a very robust statewide support entity and for the multi-benefit land repurposing grantees. And grantees are learning from each other all the time. And so there's been lots of opportunity for what's working well in one subbasin to be translated into another and then come back. And I'm thinking of, something you said about Kauai and Merced. I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about like how those systems that we're setting up are scalable or replicable.
Sure. Should we stay on projects and then go into stakeholder stuff?
Yeah. So if we could start there, then yeah.
So yeah, to Logan's point, there's about 6 approved projects, and it sounds like there will be 8 shortly, that are approved through the Department of Conservation MLRP program. The 5 in the Kauai are really have similar character. Ironically, much to Tom's point, all of them ended up near streams in the Kauai, because, well, most sort of groundwater hydrologists could see why that would occur. A lot of them are also near disadvantaged communities and all of them incorporate ecological components. The term that I'm using, like throwing around for projects, is those are unicorn projects, right? The MLRP program is bound to 4 at a state level, to 4 principles, right? We need to save water, or in that most instances, that means shifting away from irrigated agriculture to less intensive water practices. In addition, the programs need to provide community benefits and or agroeconomic benefits and or disadvantaged community benefits. That unicorn project aligns all 4, and we were fortunate in the Kauai that there were 5 of them that met those criteria. I'll speak a little bit to, since I'm just holding on to this until Robert tells me to stop. There's like, in the Merced, we're gaining greater clarity on, I was out on a couple projects, potential projects this week. I'm getting a lot more clarity of what I expect to come through in the Merced. I think there'll be some rangelands shift back to native pasture. In Merced particularly, there's a wildlife corridor that's being built into that program. I think wildlife-friendly recharge projects are going to be extremely competitive, that incorporate riparian, again, similar to the Kauai. So lastly, as we look forward, right, these are driven by, and this is probably what Logan's getting to, like the project selection, although it's coming through like these sort of key principles that are key limitations that the department is putting on each region, the criteria are built locally, right? So like when we build the criteria, we do it with local partners, and then we bring it to our stakeholder advisory committee. In Merced, just like we had people locked up in a room and Zoom rooms in the last 2 weeks, like looking at criteria documents, just folks from the community gutting through this. And so there's like a challenge and a beauty in taking that approach. But those 4 principles, I think folks can kind of take that to the bank from a Department of Conservation perspective.
Yeah, that's also a good point, because we also, in Thule, we also had this situation where the criteria was put forward and realized that as they tested against potential projects, it wasn't rigorous enough. So there was an effort to go back to the table, and it was actually brought to our attention by the disadvantaged community advocates and the conservation advocates that, hey, we need to go a little bit more deeply into this, make sure it really hits the mark on what we need to do. So that, thankfully, the GSA was willing to kind of flex a little bit and let that happen. So I think it's just another example of us kind of learning as we go and getting better, being really collaborative about how we do it. So that's really very helpful. That there's an allowance for that in the program, and also in the partners that are involved too. How about, I'm going to go to you, Matt, because I know your MAGSA is not in an MLRP program, but you are very much kind of thinking more broadly about these topics and trying to support your farmers and the community really well. So thoughts on some of the practices you're implementing? I know you're doing a lot with metering, for example, but any other things that you would share?
Well, let me give you the Matt Hurley point of view on multi-benefit land repurposing to begin with. The good presenter from the university was talking about the toolkit that he's building. I look at multi-benefit land repurposing as a tool, perhaps a part of a toolkit that a groundwater sustainability agency might take a look at. And I look at it much less as a set of projects specific for multi-benefit land repurposing, less as that and more as we shrink, as we educate, as we spend time with our landowners and talk to them about being nimble in a 21st century, et cetera, allowing them to be the good business people that I believe they are, and they will come to conclusions about their land. And as they begin to come to conclusions about their land, taking that percentage of the land that they believe they might need to retire or do something else with, and then spend the time with them following that decision rather than as an incentive to move to that decision. So it's a nuance. I happen to have a unique circumstance in my GSA in that we have no surface water. We have 120,000 acres. We have 200 square miles. We're the only GSA in the King Subbasin without any surface water. Yet, we've been charged with retiring 3/4 of the overdraft for the King Subbasin. How's that sound for an impossible task? Well, we're going to do it, and we haven't talked 1 minute about land retirement or allocations in our GSA. We are taking an entirely resource-based approach. We're going to turn the left-hand knob, which is increasing the resource, rather than the right-hand knob, which is the demand reduction. So I guess I'm perhaps a little stubborn in how we're going about this, because I'm going to talk about multi-benefit land repurposing only with those folks who come to that conclusion at the end of our own analysis internally as to where we need to be for total number of acres that will be left when we've agreed on what we need to be. So it's a last part consideration rather than an incentive in the beginning. So it's a little different, and I don't know how much detail you want me to go into on that, but that's how we're approaching it. It's just as a potential for assistance to our landowners once they've determined how much land they're going to farm and how much land they're not going to farm. But it's their choice, not ours.
And just with that, though, what I do know of some of what you're doing is that, like you said, turning the left-hand knob is really more around increasing supply and recharging. Yes. And that is a MLRP practice, of course. Generally speaking, it's been identified as one, but you're doing it kind of in a more intensive way, a pretty strategic way.
Probably more proactive to my landowners. I don't believe that they need to take any land out of production in order to do recharge.
Yeah.
So we've taken the MAR approach, the Managed Aquifer Recharge approach, or the flood MAR. We call it on-farm recharge. We've created in our GSA what we call On-Farm Recharge University, and we're training our landowners how to take flood water when it's available and spread it across their lands, whether it be pistachios, almonds, row crops, or whatever it happens to be, during the winter months to their maximum advantage for recharge, but also to their maximum advantage for continuing crop growth. So we're trying for the best of both worlds. Again, I indicated that we're at the confluence of the Kings and the San Joaquin. It's pretty to look at, but we have no water rights in either one of those water courses. And so we are looking at the flood situation, not unlike we did in 2023. In 2023, we were able, without any conveyance whatsoever, except a short 1 mile run from Don Cameron's Terra Nova project, we were able to put 20,000 acre feet of water into the ground without any improvements to speak of. We have an expansion project that we've planned that will add another 12 miles of canals and 20,000 acres of potential on-farm recharge properties. And next time we plan on putting over 250,000 acre feet in the ground as soon as there's water in either one of those water courses. Ultimately, we have a water bank planned that will have 87 miles of canals, 90 recovery wells, and 4,000 dedicated acres of recharge, in addition to the 110,000 acres of on-farm recharge that we plan to utilize. And we hope to put over almost 2 million acre feet of water in the ground over time. So again, I'm not looking to do multi-benefit repurposing of that land. I'm interested in getting the maximum use of that land, which I guess would be calling adding benefits to that land rather than limiting that land's potential. So if we do end up with some crappy land, we'll put we'll put solar on it, we'll put habitat on it, we'll do all those things, but it'll be in a manner that compensates those landowners for that, acknowledges their losses in that respect, but the benefits to the subbasin and the benefits to the GSA will pay for it. And so we'll pay ourselves for our own land retirement if we have to do it. So it's a little different approach. It's very specific to our location, and hopefully it'll be successful as an alternative to some of the the projects that are being proposed for the multi-benefit land repurposing project as the Department of Conservation has funded it.
You've been busy. Yeah. Craig, or did you want to?
I just had a quick question, because I've spent the last 25 years of my life up in the Sacramento Valley, and lots of times when we do have, big kind of floods across floodplains, which are largely orchards, I do see a good water bird response to that flooding in the orchard areas. Did you see that at all when you did that in 23?
Absolutely. You'd have thought we were at the beach, though. We had every type of waterfowl show up. We also had whitecaps and levee issues and water management issues, but all kinds of critters, I call them, they're my friendly term for them, showed up because there was water there. I'm sorry I didn't do it. Yeah, the critters showed up, and we lost a few trees, but by and large, we didn't lose hardly any. I think there was a total of 100 trees. 100 trees in the orchard world is not much. You probably lose those anyway through disease and so forth. But the interesting part is what we're overcoming in our GSA so far is an absolute myth, and I call it that flooding a live orchard will kill it. Not necessarily so. There are conditions. If you leave water on an orchard for too long and the plant begins to wake up from its winter slumber, yes, you have some issues. So it's a timing thing. But before I went to McMullin, I was in Angiola, and we had in 2017, I guess, when the Pozo Creek blew out down by Alpaugh and Allensworth, there was about 4 feet of water on a 5-year-old set of pistachio orchards all the way up to the branch break for 2 months. And all I heard was anaerobic, 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 anaerobic. The trees are all going to be dead. We finally managed to plug the hole in the Pozo Creek, pump the water off. A week later, it had the biggest bud break you've ever seen in a pistachio orchard. Happy, happy trees were underwater 4 feet deep for 2 months, and they're doing as well as they can because now they're being starved of groundwater down there. But when the floods came, we could do a lot of work with that. Unfortunately, down there, it's the old lake bottom, right? The Tulare Lake bottom is not a good recharge area. It's a lake. So it held the water. It didn't recharge the water. Contrary to that, though, in our GSA, and where we don't get as many bird benefits, is that we have areas within our GSA where we get infiltration at the rate of 18 to 24 inches a day. It's a giant sand dune. And so the water doesn't stick around all that long, but those parts that don't recharge as quickly attracted a great deal of wildlife.
I would love to also just hear if more, just speaking more broadly to Matt's point, maybe for you, Nancy, or Craig, are there kind of practices that you're seeing that are both kind of where you're transitioning irrigated ag lands to another purpose, where, for habitat or for conservation, as it may be? Are you seeing any kind of other solutions that are working that in your respective work, or that your organizations are supporting? I know that the RCDs do a lot to help landowners. Or I don't know if you want to talk to that, and maybe Craig,
I can just add maybe a little something there. So the Central Valley Joint Venture Lands Committee just established about a half a year ago Tulare Basin Working Group, and I was looking through our notes last night that had lots of people providing opportunities, and it did continually go back to these wildlife-friendly recharge basins, and and not just for MLRP projects, but kind of throughout the whole Tulare Basin, just the ability to tap into those and provide some riparian habitat and some recharge.
Great. Nancy, I'll just give you that one.
Sure.
But we'll trade them up. Yeah.
All right. So, as we heard, there aren't that many projects that are that far along yet, and I think under the current set of grantees, there aren't that many RCDs who are involved. But what I can say moving forward, and in general, and in case everybody doesn't exactly know what an RCD is, I'm just going to the 2-minute primer. So these are special districts, generally organized around county lines. So more or less, we have 1 or 2 RCDs in a county, usually one, sometimes it's a little bit different. They are agencies of the state, so they are accountable to the public, but they are non-regulatory, which is key, and that's why when Palaio was talking about how well they can partner with landowners and land managers and communities, is that they don't go in there saying, you must do this. It's like, hey, would you be interested in this? These are the things that you could do. I can help you figure out how to do them, and I can help you get the funding to get those things done. So, and the way that they can do this is they have the technical expertise to do technical assistance, doing plans for, you know, improving your irrigation, stormwater management, adding habitat to bring in more pollinators and wildlife and sequester carbon at the same time, all the things. And they are tied with state, federal, and local agencies so they can pull in funds and resources. And they're also tied to the communities where they live. They reach out to farmers, ranchers, local parks, schools, tribes, underserved farmers and ranchers, and can bring them together to pull together resources as part of little projects or big regional projects like this. In the San Joaquin Valley, we have, well, actually CRCD, working with the Carbon Cycle Institute and funded by the Patterson Foundation, formed several ag and climate hubs, each all over the state, each with its own name. In San Joaquin Valley, we have the San Joaquin Valley Soil Hub, and this is a hub of all the RCDs in that region. We have 5 RCDs in the Tulare Basin who can all work together through these hubs, pulling together their resources. Some of the RCDs are very small, some are bigger, have more resources, and pulling together their knowledge, their ties to the communities. And you could see in a region like this how that hub, bringing in all the connections they have locally and out to the funders, could really enhance what the stuff that's just coming through MLRP, because there's a lot more than that. You can, you know, they're very big experts at pulling together funding sources from all over the place and incentives from all over the place and getting these miraculous projects done. And so they are an incredible resource moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that has been a little bit challenging even for the Tule Basin is there is no real strong RCD presence. And it'd be nice. I'm a little jealous when other programs talk about their capacity they have through the RCD.
I think it's where the hubs can help them.
Yeah,
they can fill in
sure.
the gaps.
Yeah. Reyn, you had your hand up earlier. You wanted to respond to it. I don't know if that time has passed or it's long gone, right? That's fine if it is, but we can.
Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore.
Okay. I mean, just the question, right? Not just.
I just wanted to point out that Matt's already fired off the first shot in our metaphor battle. We tend to only speak in metaphors. And so the left knob was the first fire. No, I just want to point out like something important that I know Matt understands the nuance, right? And one, the left knob. Matt and I probably have a beer and talk through how much that left knob can turn, but I think there's some nuances in what Matt understands is like flood mar, one of the challenges, right? And I want to concur that, like, I agree, flood mar, like Agmar can work, but there's these unique caveats within that space. And even within MLRP, and it requires certain commitments of landowners, not just agronomically, like for the sake of your crop, but also nutrient management, like just to get the brass tacks, right? So landowners have to, if this is the deployed solution by which a region is going to sort of try and left knob or no left knob, yeah, exactly. There's a nutrient management you can be of the mind in a land repurposing action. If you flood that ground, right, you can be of the mind that what's in this Beto zone or this dry sort of zone of the soil profile, there's already nutrients there, and the fate of those nutrients are already like predefined. Nitrate, just use it as an example. The fate of those nutrients are they're going to end up in the aquifer, and you can have that stance. And if you take your inputs out, it's an open system, right? And you end the open loop. What's there, and you recharge down there, yeah, you could end up with a plume of nitrates, but you have a cessation of that nutrient. the challenge, and this is, I know that's something that Matt's going to be thinking about, or is already thinking about, but the challenge in a MAR situation or an AgMAR situation is that there's still an openness to that loop, right? So that not only do you have the same challenge of sort of any recharge effort of migrating material through the soil profile, but the system remains open, and that you have the opportunity for more application of nutrients into that system. And so strategic application, some crops are going to be way more suitable for that. There might be pragmatic applications of cover crops and deep-rooted perennial crops to like help with nitrate management in those systems. But it is the more nuanced, tricky thing, and I know Matt's going to like do some innovation for sure.
Yes,
We're on.
I know you're on it. I know. I just wanted.
it's good you're keeping it real. That's good to kind of ground it. That's good. So I want to move on to the next question, which is really in the domain of, in the context of MLRP, and I think even again more broadly, just MLR, sort of like, and really is this sense of like creating real change on the ground that's also inclusive and collaborative is not easy. It is challenging, right? As Matt always says, it's the sociology, it's the technology and the technical solutions, but it's ultimately the sociology that's a big factor, not the only for sure, but a big one. So I just wanted to maybe again kind of open it up with those that have been involved with MLRP because it's maybe most present right now for you. But I'm happy to hear from others. It's just sort of like some of the primary challenges of implementing these kinds of changes. And just not the bigger picture solutioneering, but like what does it really take to actually get growers, landowners engaged, and other parties to really begin to talk to each other? Those kinds of challenges. And then lessons learned. What would you kind of share so far in terms of like, oh, that didn't go the way I expected, or that was a little harder than I thought?
Can I talk about Keystone stakeholders? So, Reyn and the team at Valley Eco, who are the project grant managers for Queen Delta Water Conservation District, which is the grantee, put together a really interesting model for engaging constituents in a really thoughtful way and bringing people into what we now call our stakeholder advisory committee. So I think it was intended to be a process that took place over 6 months, that it ended up being quite accelerated because we wanted to do an open request for proposals. But we started by identifying what we called keystone stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So these were people who would essentially help open doors, gates, windows to other constituent groups. And so having organized and communicated with those keystone stakeholders, we identified a larger group, engaged with them, and from that larger group, there was some self-selection, there was some targeted recruitment to make sure that we had both broad and diverse representation on the ultimate stakeholder advisory committee. We were able to move towards this fairly stable committee that serves as an advisory group for the KWEA MLRP. And so I think the intention and thoughtfulness that went into that is really important. And I know that Reyn and team have had a chance to do like next iteration of that with their work in Merced. I think one of the things that worked really well about that model is that we were engaging diverse constituents together rather than separately. And so I'm just thinking a couple of meetings ago, I was sitting next to two people who I don't think would ever have an occasion to talk to each other, and everyone would probably assume that these two people would have extremely divergent viewpoints. And yet, they were having a robust conversation about potential monitoring for future projects. And so I think having a diversity of voices and representations in the room has been really key in moving things forward for this particular stakeholder group.
Great.
Sorry, I feel like I'm using this mic a lot. I'll try to be quick. So just on challenges, I kind of split them into like the first challenge, and I think it's what Logan's really jumping at this, like one of the developed solutions, but one of the first challenges that kind of came across in the sociological space was this. I describe MLRP, we can make it a star, like we can add as many points on it, but the simplest shape is a triangle, right? And so like, I say there's like 3 points tethering the MLRP program. We say it's the community, it's the agricultural economy, or land-based economies, and it's your environment/ecosystem. And these 3, they're all in this room right now, so don't look at each other. These 3 triangles, right? And sort of right at the center of them is this finite water resource. And I'm going to get like really weirdly philosophical, but like Martin Buber, like we can only be redeemed to the extent with which we can see ourselves, right? And we need to identify very quickly where we sit on that triangle and how that's weighting our biases and how that's pulling the direction of that resource into ourselves or our constituencies. Simultaneously, we need to recognize, so thou, right? Martin Buber today is the theme of the day. We need to see the biases of our colleagues and understand and accept the biases that they're sitting on as they're pulling towards the environment, or they're pulling into that resource into the agricultural sphere, at least that perception thereof. To do that sociologically, like in a room full of strangers, to one, help people identify where they're sitting, and then secondly, identify and accept the position and sort of the weight that other party brings is really tricky. I think one of the solutions to that is not only that Keystone stakeholder model, but it's a really simple, it's what this room is. It's that you need you need those triangles to see each other and hear each other directly. You can't narrate their story. They need to see each other. They need to hear each other's problems. And so it was one of the solutions. And then I want to get like more mechanical back to Matt here about incentive versus what is like an incentive to create action, and when you need the incentive, or that really what's a mitigation for an action. And MLRP already, I see it behave in 2 different ways in 2 different basins. In Tulare, we're operating what I would call in like a post-allocation, or like we're in it, right? Like this geography is in Sigma. We have allocations, people are getting their invoices and they're asking questions, and they're already having to make, as Matt's alluding to, like really difficult business decisions. And in this basin, it gives us a different flavor of the program, and it's largely reactive and responsive to that social environment where the business platform, those decisions are made, and it creates a different type of interaction. And it's almost easier to get a project here because especially a bigger grower already know where their ground's coming out of production. They might not talk about it, but they know. And so that changes the conversation. Then we move north to Merced. Their allocations don't hit till 26. And not only that, they have a ramp down period built into their allocation model. So when you go to them, their business decision, one, is almost surreal, right? It's not real yet because they haven't gotten a bill for it. And then 2, the business decision is that you grow your trees, you grow your crops all the way until that allocation hits, and then you follow this sort of ramp down of let's call it a fee, right? You follow this until the financial model breaks, and that might be in 28. And so for them to adopt an MLRP action looks more incentivizational, as opposed to like a response to a business decision. So MLRP is a framework for thought, and a framework for like moving resources operates sort of simultaneously in these 2 different mechanisms.
Wow, that's great. Who knew that we'd be talking about Martin Buber in the middle of an MLRP conversation? Awesome.
Leave it to
Well, how about others that would I just kind of chime in on this, kind of the challenges and lessons learned with getting kind of encouraging, incentivizing, allowing change to occur?
I might add that I have not been personally involved with the MLRP project, but I have worked on lots of multi-benefit projects within the Central Valley and kind of seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And one thing I always go back to is that, I think I got this in some kind of leadership training, is, go to the community early and often, and basically have meaningful collaboration, with your community, with your landowners, and with your land managers, and try to at least start a common vision that people can buy into, and it makes things a lot easier as you move forward.
Well said.
Careful what you ask for on this one. You want to go? Go ahead.
Yeah, because it'll be short, because I know so much less than you. I was just at the Latino Farmer Conference yesterday, and one of the things that and this is kind of funny, but I was listening in on an irrigation class for the Latino farmers who were there from an RCD, and what we really were talking about is that we have all these good models for, this was just irrigation, saving water, but every single farm has its own conditions, and the farmer knows the conditions. And I think when we're doing these projects region-wide, we still have to know that it's parcel by parcel, and it's going to be a different model for everyone else, which is kind of, I think, what you two were talking about. That, and we have to remember that the needs are going to be different. I think everyone wants the best outcome that we can get, but the paths are going to be different depending on the shape of the place where you're putting the path, I guess.
Yeah, that's where that kind of one-size-fits-all scalable idea is not really great. Yes, you want things to generally be replicable, but you have to be flexible and adaptive for sure to the reality of the situation. Yeah, Matt?
Well, the other point, there should be no project that's not multi-benefit.
Right.
But the question of whether it will result in a repurposing of land is a critical tilt.
Yep.
And so, I think necessity being the mother of invention, I think what we've decided to do is to fight the repurposing of land until it is the only choice remaining. And so that's why we're going to do as many things as we can otherwise. But what I've heard about every bit of the conversation here, and even in this room, is we don't have a common understanding of what we're talking about. So it's impossible to have a stakeholder group that can give you anything other than the best they can give you given their level of understanding. And so you're going to be limited by that. So I always fall back on the thing that drives my GSA, because we are looking up the hill, right? It couldn't get any worse. But we have to come up and build an educational part that starts in the beginning. I mean, it has to be elementary in its beginnings, and it has to bring everybody forward so that when we get to the point where we start to make those decisions, we are all on the same page when we do it. And it's very difficult. Like we said before, I think somebody talked about we had 10 years. I'm still using 15 because 2040 is 15 years from now, and I'm not giving up till the very last minute. But we have to know what we're talking about, and farmers generally know about their crops and about their farms, but believe it or not, they don't understand necessarily the concept of a basin-wide situation, because it is so narrow for them. That's their world. They know their world, but they don't even know their neighbor's world sometimes. So I think we got to educate. We still have to spend at least 20% of our time educating and outreaching and talking before we can begin to talk about the actual solution with them, no matter what it is, whether it's habitat or it's land repurposing for other things. I think we just have to bring everybody up so we're not talking down to anybody ever in conversation.
I'll just taking off my facilitator hat for 1 second, just in terms of with the Thule subbasin, we were finding we were having a hard time engaging growers and early on, and we realized what was happening is our fact sheets and our information was way too general, it was way too conceptual, and they couldn't relate to it. They're like, I don't know enough about MLRP, I barely understand Sigma in detail, all this stuff, I don't know what's gonna happen exactly. So it wasn't until we got much more specific, much more clear about practical on-the-ground solutions, what it might look like for them, then they came to the table, then we could have conversations, then they were like really interested in creating solutions and putting on their kind of entrepreneurial hat and trying to figure out how to address this. So I think that, and to me, that was like a big aha, and it's kind of intuitively it makes sense, but when you kind of see it in real life, and all of a sudden it went from like the light bulb went on, and we're like, okay, this is where we have to go make sure people understand what we're really talking about here, and to know that we still don't have all the answers. Even when we're saying, here's what recharge will look like, here's what large-scale solar will look like, here's what it's going to look like with habitat. It's still not that clear.
Yeah, I just want to add, just thinking about this education, development of a common language piece. I think it is so critical, and also, and maybe this is just from the point of view of, working with some of the MLRP grantees, where we're asked to create projects, right? But I don't think that it has to be, we get all the education and we develop all the understanding and then we move into projects. I think they can run parallel, and that these early developments of pilot projects will inform further education in a helpful cycle.
Yeah, I think it's right. It's not just like as if we have all the answers up front and we're going to download it to you. Right? It is, we're learning together. It's this kind of whole learning cycle that's iterative for sure. Please.
Oh no.
You just okay. No,
are we
right.
hitting like closeout time?
We're almost there. Don't worry. Yeah, we're getting there. Don't worry. So just hold your powder for a second. Yeah. I think I want to also just shift a little bit more towards. Okay, so if we were to look beyond the MLRP program per se, but also just acknowledging that it exists and that it will probably continue to exist with the Prop 4 funding. What do you see as the opportunities for more coordination and collaboration that gets beyond just the singular programs that are being kind of funded right now?
Cool. This is exactly what I was going to talk about.
But I could actually.
You could feel it.
Yeah.
So MLRP can't do this. Department of Conservation can't do this independently. And the more I work on this, the more I realize that. Yesterday I was out on a dairy, unknown dairy, and they had some and in this field they were using like effluent from post treatment in their digester, and they were using this effluent on this field that was also, they were farming and irrigating it, and they brought me out there because they wanted to do like an MLRP recharge project. And I went out there and I said, well, maybe let's rethink this for a second. Yes, we could hypothetically do an MLRP project, but we can't do your recharge project. And we actually don't need MLRP to do this. And I hope all of you that do work on the landscape, and that's the vast majority, you're probably saying you already do this. And that's what I was saying while I was sitting there on that road. I was just like, you don't need MLRP to do this. There are programs in place that can deliver the thing, right? Like what we should do is actually like, let's stop irrigating this field and let's turn it into a rangeland. You have a water shortage, you need to do something. So let's turn it and let's plant some deep-rooted native perennials. Let's fence it off. Let's turn it into a habitat site that can be grazed. And you don't even need me. I want to do it. But you don't need me. Like we could do that with NRCS. We can do that with CDFA. I can direct you elsewhere. I was on another project in the creek just in the upper watershed of Merced yesterday also, because this is how my life is. And on that creek, it was like 150 acres, and it was adjacent to the stream, and it flooded, and it should be restored, in my opinion, to a scrub riparian that could take that flood flows. And again, I was like, river partners could just do this. And the more I'm in this MLRP space, the more I'm convinced that we cannot do this without the investment of peripheral agencies. And we need to be treating MLRP as the pathway to solve the other agency problems. We need to be able to go to Department of Water Resources and say, you need to put recharge basins on the ground, and all of them have been identified through this MLRP project that provide multiple benefits. Just do these. And they're already cited next to disadvantaged communities, and they already incorporate ecological components. Do these. Go to the Wildlife Conservation Board. Do the River Partners projects where the community has already seen the proposal and said that we want to do this. Do that project. Don't focus your resources into the spaces that are operating on a shared process and a shared understanding of the landscape. And the secret to unlocking MLRP, and it's so finite in and of itself, but the process has so much utility that I'm more and more inclined to think that MLRP is the mechanism. Department of Conservation, awesome, but as a whole, it's so much bigger than that, and we need to really be taking that approach, that landscape approach, Tom's approach, that level of thinking, and moving agencies into a mindset where they don't have to start everything from scratch and blind. They can move through these existing pathways. And that's how MLRP happens. That's how you turn $200 million into $2 billion is through directive action through these other agencies, right? Like Merced, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we're right on in the acquisition boundary with Fish and Wildlife Service. And regardless of if they acquire land or not, they're a critical partner, and they can invest at least thought and conceptualization to that space, hopefully money. But we need to be thinking about this higher level recruitment of agency participation.
Wow, great.
I think that just kind of goes back to what I was talking about, where
Repeat after me.
RCDs, because as I was saying, they are these masters of pulling together all these different sources of fundings and programs and their knowledge of what those programs can do and feeding right into this. So thank you for setting that up for me.
Yeah, on the line there.
And I would add, I mentioned earlier about this Tulare Basin Working Group with the Central Valley Joint Venture. If you think of the Central Valley Joint Venture, I just came up with about 15 acronyms here about different programs that are available outside of MLRP for funding and technical assistance. But being able to get a lot of our member partners for the joint venture out on the ground and seeing some of these projects would be very helpful. Some of them run state agencies, federal agencies, and hold the purse strings for a lot of these programs. But then they also have people that on the ground that work with RCDs and work locally. So trying to tie those folks together, I think, would be really helpful in being able to get them to understand what your needs are here. I think we could help facilitate that with the joint venture.
2 cents? 2 cents, Robert? Sounds to me like a network would be very valuable. And bringing it completely full circle to the Tulare Basin Watershed Partnership was network. I don't know why the network went away, but I keep leaving it on there. The purpose of this organization in its outset was to create a network. Soapy Mulholland said in a very small group one day, she goes, we just need a network to be able to put all these people together. And I said, you're brilliant. That's what it needs to be. It needs to be a network. You said it needs to be a network earlier today. Mm-hmm. That's what we need. That's what we need here. My dream, believe it or not, on the board up here, was it stated the basin event like this with 10,000 people at it. If we had that, listen to the bubbling that's going on in here today, the conversation that's going on here today, the ideas that are going on here today, with 10,000 very capable humans that had all kind of different viewpoints talking about this same problem, we could fix it in a quick hurry. So that, I think, still continues in my mind to be one of the most important things that will help make the MLRP work even better, is to get more people involved and get them, again, educated, understanding on a common conversation, and then let them start pointing out, well, I have a piece of property over here, I think it'd work perfect, or I think this one would really work, because I know, contrary to SAGB, it sucks up water like a sponge, and we could put that as a recharge, or it's a tremendous place. I've got naturally occurring native species growing out here that I can hardly control as it is, because they like it so much. Let's do it. So that's how it happens. It happens from the communication element as well.
Yeah. And then with that network idea, we've been talking about this and toying with this idea for a while too, is just there are all these kind of unique challenges, even just was brought up earlier around recharge and how do you do that effectively, or how you do large scale solar effectively, or convert to grazing effectively, and where does it make sense, where does it not, what are the new crops that you could be looking at. I think sort of that sense of like learning across these different programs and across these different jurisdictions, and then how do you kind of like start cracking the code on some of these problems so that it's easier it's not every single district trying to figure it out on their own or in small scale, but trying to leverage the best thinking about it. So we have time for a couple questions. I would love to kind of open up a little bit before we get going. So I see Craig, and then, John, and then Barbara. You need a mic. Okay, we'll have to just juggle mics here a lot. I think we'll probably just...
Greg, you want to raise your hand?
Greg, yeah.
Robert always gets my name wrong, it's fine.
What did I say?
My dad's Craig. I'm Greg.
Craig and Greg.
Gregory, yes.
It's fine.
Just
try Gregory and you'll know it's wrong. So one of the things that bugs me about this network is that we only hang out once a year. And I'm wondering, based on these conversations, if a rather outdated tool of the internet, which has kind of been superseded because of things like Facebook groups, which is called a forum, might be applicable here. Because if we had a forum on that website where people could drop in with ideas and actually write out their thoughts so that anyone could come in and read it and continue developing that thought or creating a train that builds into momentum to actually make something happen, that's just generally lacking because we all can't talk to each other all the time. I can't hang out with all the partners here every day and know what you're doing. But if we were able to collaborate in a single space on the internet, which is totally accessible to anybody, I could see a lot of benefit coming out of creating conversations that don't disappear at the end of the day. At the end of the phone call, you know, those thoughts get locked back in your mind until you bring them up again. But an internet forum is a really cool tool. I've been using them since I was a kid. I blame a lot of my outspokenness on the fact that I've been talking to strangers on the internet since I was like 12. But it's a great way to collaborate. And it's a super easy tool to build into almost any website. And it could be really beneficial to break it down by the types of projects we're doing or the region that we're in or however, and collaborate in that kind of a space. So I just want to throw that out there.
Great idea. Yeah. I think it's John, then Barbara. Thanks, Gregory. Appreciate it.
I was going to find another name for you, but
Bob.
I just want to add to that, though. Please don't,
Let us pass you the.
I know, please don't understand for 1 second that the entirety of what the Tulare Basin Watershed Partnership Network does is plan a year in advance for the next state of the basin. Well, there's a lot more than that going on. I mean, we've been meeting on Zooms and everything else for, several years now. And we do it as often as we can, and certainly every idea like that is welcome. That's what a good network does. It constantly is alive with communications and never without that. So this is just a chance to all get together and once a year kind of compare notes. But man, the conversations have to go daily, hourly, if possible, amongst all the members, for sure.
So one of the tough issues that's out there, and I think, Nancy, you can really address this with the capabilities of RCDs, but I also want Matt to weigh in a little bit, and definitely Logan to weigh in a bit as land managers. The problem with a lot of these grant programs, matter of fact, I think every one that I've ever heard about, they get you started, and then you have to pay for maintenance over the rest of the time, not just a year, 10 years, whatever, it's going to be a while. Anything that we take out of this MLRP to turn into just habitat that doesn't have a funding, income source, even ranching, it's like, yeah, there's some there, but it might not be enough to do the invasive species issues or flood control issues if it's along a canal or anything. The RCDs are also really good at joining into JPAs. And JPAs can be with a county or city government or both to spread out the cost. So for Nancy, it's the JPAs. For Matt, it's kind of the, hey, when you see it, it's how many groundwater sustainability agencies want to charge all their members for doing something that's non-productive as far as income. And then back to Logan, it's like, you can give us an idea of what it costs just to manage land that's supposedly just native land, because it does take an effort to keep it up.
Joint Powers Authority? Yep. You want to respond to that? Yeah.
Yes, and I'm not extremely knowledgeable about JPAs, but you are touching on something that we talk about all the time, that you get landowners to agree to do this great work and it gets funded and they don't have to pay for it, but they have to agree that they're going to maintain it to a certain extent, and that's costly. And we've yet to see any grant programs that the grant says, yeah, we're going to cover that forever in perpetuity. So I think, we need to find a way to make it not costly to the landowner over a long period of time to do the right thing. And I don't know what that is, but what you're suggesting is one of the smartest and least expensive ways to do it. But it shouldn't come out of the landowner's pocket. Yeah.
Let me just mention, having worked for the San Joaquin River Conservancy and talking to a lot of other conservancies, we talked both to Madera and to the Sierra RCDs about doing things for us. Very high potential, they are now doing a little bit, but also the Tahoe Conservancy has this Joint Powers Authority with the RCD up there. RCDs for anybody out there, she's already mentioned this, it's like the other part is their ability to get things done, to staff up. They have the ability to work with state agencies as a state agency, but they don't have the bureaucracy of a state agency. So it's cool. It's very, very nice.
So I'll apologize in advance that I don't have like a number in my back pocket, like a X per acre.
Not free, right?
But it's extensive, right? Like when we think about the acres that Sequoia Riverlands Trust as a landowner just within Tulare County, it's hundreds of thousands per year, and that's not even doing all the work that we would like to do. I mean, Jonathan, our land steward, is sitting here in the front row with some of his team, and they're doing amazing work, and there's so much more that could be done. So, as some of you may know, if you're on our mailing list, we're out raising funds all the time because there aren't funding sources for so much of the work that we need to do for these lands that, John, you were sort of intimating, like, for a long time, like, we're on the hook for perpetuity. Like, there are very few opportunities in life to sign your name on a line for forever, but that's what land trusts do. And so the immensity of that responsibility is always very present.
You know, I think that's a defeatist attitude, John. Nothing's free, absolutely, but I guess my experience coming from Silicon Valley and being one of those confounded attorneys, I'm an attorney, I'm trying to recover as best I can from being an attorney in Silicon Valley, but nothing in Silicon Valley ever got done without the money to make it happen. Money's the mother's milk of invention in Silicon Valley, but you can make a package. You can do something with a package. I'm not going to ask my landowners to flood their land at potentially great risk to them and their crops unless I'm going to give them something for it, which is a share of that water or an allocation of that water or whatever. I'm not going to do anything with my GSA that doesn't have, again, multi-benefits, so that all of my landowners have some sort of benefit out of everything we're doing. So if they're paying $19 an acre into the pot to make these things happen, they're going to get a benefit. So you have to build every single project with some form of benefit in it, or else you're not going to make it. And so even Logan, I think the public thinks that land trusts are a benefit. And so the public generally can take care of something like that. You know, in LA, what's an extra penny on your bill every month to take care of something like that? But you just have to plan for that cost from the very beginning and just expect that you're going to have that cost. Instead of thinking of it as an ongoing nuisance, you have to think of it as an ongoing obligation in order to get to your goal, I think, anyway.
So, Matt, you missed the handoff I had on that. The idea is to get the county, or potentially if you run through a city, the general taxpayer to help pay out instead of just the farming lands that are part of your GSA.
Well, and I guess I said that about the public, because that's the land trust benefit, right? That's a larger, even in the county, public benefit. But in most counties, they've already done their increment. That 1%'s been used up a long time ago. It's cut up so fine that nobody gets enough benefit out of it. But you know, it takes a huge lift to get a county to agree to pay for anything. Sigma right now is, you know, hey, county, you got any money? Get out of here. They don't have anything for us. And so I think you just have to be more practical about it. But I do believe that almost every single project you look at, if in fact you really analyze it correctly, you can come up with a methodology to make it all work over the long term. You have to. That's the fallacy of grants. I agree with you. The fallacy of grants are we're gonna incentivize you to get kind of hooked into this and be committed to it, but we're gonna take the money away and force you to cover it. Well, anybody who takes the grant better be prepared for what comes after, because if you're not, you shouldn't take it in the first place, because all you're going to do is set yourself up for failure, and that's not helpful. That's not helpful at all. Anyway, Maybe that's just a different way of looking at it, John. I would just add, if you're looking at grants for like projects, like habitat restoration projects or what have you, lots of times if you double down with land protection and get a conservation easement on the property, then the private landowner has some principal that they've received. And if they invest that or they put that into another income producing property, they can use that interest for the management of the property long-term until somebody wants to liquidate it. But for a while it'll work. That's what I'm talking about. Here, let me talk about the RCDs one quick. Just to put a plug in for Nancy and the RCDs. The RCDs don't necessarily get tax increment or any regular source of money. They're always scrambling and trying to get grants to keep themselves alive. But they are a unique entity that can provide service for a fee. And so they can set themselves up in an area like that for specialty help, clearing, defensible spaces in the Sierra, or, doing some things on some of the habitat down in the valley, or running a mobile soil testing truck, or whatever it happens to be. They can do those kind of things, which will help to kind of pay for some of the incremental costs that are ongoing and help to, decrease those overall costs. So RCDs are just an absolute benefit that shouldn't be overlooked ever.
Barbara, you got a question, and then we're gonna.
Yeah, this is really a complaint more than a question. So I am an unpaid volunteer. I represent a small local environmental organization, and there are others of us here. We have been systematically excluded from stakeholders. We have not been asked for advice. When we've tried to give advice or get engaged, we've been refused. And we are not the only ones. I would say that meaningful engagement may have been refused to tribal people, to Ellensworth, and I would really like to see that meaningfully addressed.
Me too.
You're speaking in the concept of MLRP specifically?
Well, GSAs,
General.
right? Planning and engagement. That's what you guys are interested in doing, right? And it may be that the people on the panel are not the people I should be speaking to, but you should be aware that there are people who are not at the table.
I'll say too that,
Do you want the
Microphone?
Sure, yeah, representing, just my experience with Thule is that, yes, there's been some lack of readiness, I would call it more than anything. But there's a real effort afoot now to, in a very concerted way, do much more engagement around with disadvantaged communities. It's already happening in kind of co-designing projects. It's starting a lot more in earnest, and also with tribal representation. We're actually in the process of scheduling a really exciting conversation with the Tachis very soon. We're kind of mid process of making that happen. It's not the whole answer by a long shot, and we also made sure, we said to the GSAs, are you, if we go and reach out to them, are you going to listen and really engage? And the answer this time has been yes. We're pretty open right now. They're thinking, I think it's starting to shift given the kind of landscape, so to speak.
But also, like the Tule River tribe, that they have not been engaged because they live above the dam.
No.
And so they're not considered a stakeholder, but they're native peoples.
Yeah, they will be in part of, at least with Thule.
My organization represents the whole county, but I'm not considered a stakeholder because I don't live in the affected area.
We should talk more, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, wait.
And we get what was that?
Gregory wants to say something. Can I hand it off to him?
I also would encourage future stakeholder engagement to make sure that in situations where there is a room full of people and I'm among the groups that are seeking stakeholder engagement, we make sure that those stakeholders are up in front, not just getting the mic handed to them in the crowd to make a comment here and there, but to make them feel like they're truly engaged. We need to make sure that they feel like people are listening to them, and the position that you take in the room makes a big difference about that perception, especially for those people who don't regularly engage in these kinds of spaces. To come to a meeting as an invited participant in a room full of people And to have to wave from the back of the room with the expectation that someone's going to hear you is very different than the opportunity to get invited to the front and to speak. And I don't see that happening enough in the way that we're engaging with stakeholders.
Good feedback. Very good. Okay. Great. Just real quick.
I'll be really as real as possible here. Whoa. So, I don't want that to happen again. Barbara, yeah, Mike's walking away from you. I just really wanted to ask you a real follow-up question, and I may not have the best optics on process. So could you just be like very real? These seats are pretty warm up here typically. So could you just be really real, and I'm gonna heat that one up too. Like what does that look like, right? There's some level, and just, again, I'm just going to be as transparent, and I'll put myself out there. There's like a real problem with like tokenism when you build stakeholder advisory committees and stakeholder groups. You end up and it's resolved by what young Gregory, not Greg, it's largely resolved by what Greg is getting to, which is like a real, like actually doing something and actually making decisions, and that's some part of it. But I'm just going to kind of like punt this back to you as someone who's part of that process. Could you be like more clear and like what is happening? Like what is like just let's be real.
To be included and I'm being refused. How about that?
All right.
Is that clear enough?
That's clear.
Okay.
Thank you, Barbara.
Great. So that's good feedback for sure. We do have to. Oh, yes. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, I
Where's the
just
mic?
showed Safik that I wanted to say something.
Okay, one more question. Okay.
Can you all hear me? Because like Matt Hurley, I too speak loudly. Oh. Okay, I'll speak in here. I work for the Allensworth Progressive Association. 90% of our work is community outreach and engagement. Come to us. Come to us beforehand. I waited 2 years for the MLRP people to come knock on our door. 2 years I was waiting because I knew before I left the Watershed Partnership and moved over to the APA, I knew that the funding was coming down. So I knew this was happening. We saw land trusts coming together in our area. So I kept waiting for that knock on the door because I kept hearing, well, you know, Allensworth is on our mind, Allensworth is on our mind, Allensworth is on our mind. So finally, like, why weren't we involved in the... Ooh, see, I spoke too loud.
Crank it up, crank it up.
So my question is like, we want to be involved in the planning of community outreach and engagement because oftentimes, and I'll just throw the state of California under the bus. They don't know how to do community outreach and engagement. Most of their state agencies absolutely do not know how to do it. And then they give mandates for community outreach and engagement for like GSAs, for all of the other agencies, and they come into the communities and they fumble the ball. And it's like, and we keep asking, come to us first. We will help you learn how to do it properly. That way, when you come in to our community, you will get what you want and we will get what we need. And so we don't want to be an afterthought. We don't want to be brought in after you guys have already made your community outreach and engagement plans. We want to be there at the table helping you all learn how to do it in a way that would be mutually beneficial to everybody. So I just want to throw that out because I've been a part at a little bit towards the end of the Kauai MLRP, and just as a resident of Isola and a homeowner. And then I've been a part of the Thule MLRP, again, a little bit later in the game, as a representative of Allensworth. And the difference between how both MLRPs have done community outreach and engagement is so glaring and really heartbreaking as far as I'm concerned in a lot of ways. Because it's like, why couldn't you all have talked too beforehand and kind of like shared your ideas with how you guys were going to go about doing it? Because it really was like, we all needed to be in those rooms together. We needed to be with the landowners too at the very beginning. I know it's uncomfortable. I know that we all are coming from like different perspectives and trying to like get to that common ground, and that's a very uncomfortable process, but we've got to do it. And so, and then the answer to that has been for community members or leaders to meet privately with landowners. And to me, it's already a very uncomfortable, intimidating space to be in if you don't know the rules of the game. And so you're asking community members who don't do this for work, they don't do this as their job, and you're asking them to come into a space where they don't know the acronyms, they don't know the laws, they don't know the legislation, they don't know those kinds of things, and you're asking them to give you information to where they're not even fully understanding, well, what's happening here, because they know what they need, they know what their issues are, they know what their priorities are, but they don't really know what's on the table or what's being offered to begin with. And so even the information that they're able to share back with you all, it's not even all the time as helpful as it could be, is if we were just included from the very start. We're not an afterthought. Our issues, the issues our communities and the environment and the habitat face, when you solve those issues, you solve all our issues. We're not an afterthought. We really need to stop being treated as if we are.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you. That's thoughtful and instructive. We do need to wrap. We're over time, but this has been a rich conversation. I just want to make sure we kind of just, from our panel, it's just a real super quick kind of closing, like 1-2 sentence thought, like short and sweet. Either something that's either positive, encouraging about where we can go going forward, or potentially a sort of a provocative idea about kind of shake up our thinking a little bit. So either encouraging, positive, or something provocative for us to kind of leave with. Short and sweet.
Yeah, I don't have any fun things to say anymore. I think Des actually brings up sort of a good nuance, and it's there's a cost to the MLRP program, this multi-benefit, or multi-basin. Everyone tries a different thing. Let's diversify. It has this cool benefit of drives innovation. And I was actually saying this on the way in today. It's parts of some MLRP basins will fail in some regards, and it's because we've splintered them out. That is the cost. So, and I see the self-help team is in here and they're part of the SSE. I would post-analysis, after-action analysis to evaluate what we keep, what we reject as part of a program is part of that innovation. And I'm hoping this conversation and intra-basin communication stem from that. And I can pretty much bank that the self-help team is going to go that route.
That was really good, but that was more than 2 sentences.
I'll be really short.
Yes, I'm sure.
Folks, Des, Barbara, do me a favor. Don't take no for an answer. End of subject. There you go. I know. It's a simple concept.
I would just add, I just really want to thank everybody for today. I learned a lot about MLRP and just what's going on down here. But looking forward to finding out more what the vision is for the area and seeing how the joint venture can integrate and help you out with implementing some of that.
I would just say we are collectively, all of us, I think, we're not here to be right, but we're here to get it right. And that's going to take hearing hard feedback. It's going to take assimilating that hard feedback and coming back around and doing better, and then getting up the next day and doing better and doing better.
And I think we've already had the message of that partnering with RCDs is really important, but something that I was thinking about when we were talking about projects and maintenance, and the project's over and then you maintain it, and I was thinking about how the indigenous people in this world
it's not a project. You don't do the project and then you do the maintenance. It's living, knowing how to maintain that land forever in the cycles. And if we can kind of relearn from our native peoples how to do that, the job eventually can be much better. If we think of it as, it's not just a project, right? It's not just a project, it's an ongoing way to keep ourselves and our planet alive, so.
A beautiful note to end on. Thank you, everybody. 5-minute break, and then we'll reconvene. A real 5-minute break, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah.